Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome back to Destination Net Zero, Nature and Bioeconomy Days. I'm Bruce Dudley, Chief of Partnerships and New Initiatives for the Delphi Group, and it's my pleasure to open up this first session of our second day of programming, where we'll continue to work together to uncover the actions we need to take to get on the path to net zero in our nature and bioeconomy sectors. Before we officially get started, I wanted to acknowledge that many of us joining this virtual event from Canada are settlers on land that is the traditional, ancestral, and often unceded territory of a diversity of Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. The act of acknowledging the land and the signed treaties where applicable is an act of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada and is an expression of respect and gratitude for the land. This action is to remind us that our places of work, where we live and where we gather, are on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples who historically resided here and still presently do. I myself have the privilege of joining you from the unceded territories and traditional lands and waters of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. My family and I are fortunate to call this area home, living on the shores of the beautiful Kitchissippi, or Great River. We had a fantastic day one of programming yesterday with some pretty powerful takeaways to feed our 10 by 10. That is the 10 actions we need to take in the next 10 years in order to reach our net zero ambitions. Really exciting times. We heard a number of very specific actions that need to be taken that will help us get to the finish line, which is awesome. And not to worry, our dedicated session note takers captured all of this wonderful input, and it'll be summarized in the Nature and Bioeconomy Days summary 10 by 10 report that will be shared with all the event participants. Today's sessions are about collaboration and emphasizing our partners. Today's Partner Day is an opportunity for Globe partners and collaborators to work with us to leverage the Globe platform and our convening power, to showcase net zero leadership, to unpack critical challenges, and to uncover solutions that will help us deliver on our net zero ambition. Our opening partner session today is no exception, and we're really excited for the lineup that we have for you. This session will cover WWF Canada's plan to regenerate Canada. We'll spotlight real, tangible nature restoration projects that are happening on the ground in Canada right now, and why and how Aviva Canada is investing in nature to fight climate change. As I said, we have a fantastic speaker lineup to discuss all of this today. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, Megan Leslie, President and CEO of WWF Canada. Megan, over to you.
Here we go. Thanks, Bruce. And hello, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today in a conversation that's going to take us from the corporate boardrooms to the riverbanks. We're here to have a solutions-focused conversation about the major threats facing our planet. And I know with the panelists we've lined up, and also I can see some of the attendees who've joined us, it's going to be an excellent conversation. As you heard, I'm Megan Leslie, President and CEO of WWF Canada, and I'm joining this call from my home in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I'm grateful to be living and working on these lands. This panel, as you know, is part of Globe's Destination Net Zero, Nature and Bioeconomy Days. And I'm here today as part of WWF Canada's bold new 10-year plan, Regenerate Canada. We launched our plan earlier this fall, and it has incredibly ambitious goals around restoring habitats, stewarding nature, and capturing and storing carbon. In addition to setting these high-level goals, almost everything we do is designed to benefit both wildlife and climate. And the reason for this new dual focus is the realization that the biodiversity and climate crises are so interconnected, we can't really solve one without the other. But luckily, there are solutions that can address both at the same time. So first, what are some of the threats? Well, it's becoming increasingly difficult to talk about the impacts of climate change, and not difficult in terms of the science or the impacts, but difficult because it's so real. We all know someone who's been impacted by fires or floods, heat domes, ice melts, landslides, superstorms. I mean, that list is too long. And the utter devastation of communities and territories in BC was unthinkable before last week. And we hold the people impacted by this disaster in our hearts. This is the code red that UN scientists warned us about this past summer with their sixth assessment report. And you know what? These are the impacts that we are trying to reverse. I almost hate to say it, but there is another crisis, and that's biodiversity loss. The impacts might not be as visible as climate change, but they are just as severe. So biodiversity, just a fancy word for diversity of life on this planet, the birds and fish and trees, the mushrooms, the creepy crawlies and microorganisms. That's biodiversity. And the planet's biodiversity is shrinking a lot and quickly. And in fact, when it comes to wildlife, here in Canada, over half our wildlife populations are in decline. Half in Canada. And speaking of halves, half of the world's GDP relies on nature's services. That's 44 trillion US dollars. The rapid loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing right now will cause the cost of doing business to soar. What's it going to mean when we don't have any pollinators to pollinate our crops? Or when we've built on all the wetlands so there isn't any nature left to absorb floods? Or when cutting down a local forest means less humidity in the air, which causes a nearby farm to turn into desert? But the good news is we have the tools to start nature's recovery, and there's still time to reverse the course that we're on. The next 10 years is critical. We've got to take the right actions in the right places if we're going to lay the groundwork for long-lasting positive change for wildlife and for people. But how? Well, we can take action with nature, protecting and regenerating nature, because nature's habitat, and habitat's a building block for biodiversity, but nature also stores carbon. Did you know 30% of our global greenhouse gases comes from the destruction of nature? So when we cut down those forests, drain wetlands, build on our coastlines, we're taking carbon that's locked in the soils and trees and the seagrass, and we're converting it into carbon that goes up into the atmosphere. That's called the conversion of carbon. And we need to stop that conversion of carbon by figuring out where is the carbon in the landscape that we need to protect, and where isn't it, where we have the opportunity to restore that carbon, restore ecosystems, and actively sequester carbon into the landscape and seascape. And that's why at WWF Canada, we've launched the Nature and Climate Grant Program, presented in partnership with Aviva Canada. This program provides funding to local groups and Indigenous organizations across the country to support efforts to restore degraded lands and shorelines in order to improve habitats and capture carbon. I'd like to bring Jason Stora, CEO of Aviva Canada, into this conversation to talk about Aviva and what Aviva is doing on climate and why the company is investing in nature as part of its climate strategy. Jason, welcome.
Thank you so much, Megan. And look, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this really meaningful conversation and give us a chance to talk about how we're working together and what more we can all do to regenerate Canada. But before I start, I do want to acknowledge the land that I'm meeting on. I'm in my office in downtown Toronto today, and this is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So all of us at Aviva are really excited to join forces with Megan and the team at WWF Canada and work with local organizations like the ALUS, Project Watershed, and many more to reverse biodiversity loss and fight climate change with nature. For many of us, climate change has become the new normal, and it's no longer something that people can pretend doesn't exist or that it's going to go away. I believe the profound impact of COVID-19 pales by comparison to the impact that we're seeing and we will continue to see with climate change. And just as what we've witnessed with COVID-19, the most vulnerable have been the hardest hit. If we take the situation in British Columbia, which has been devastating, work is continuing around the clock to clean up and recover after the storm, but thousands of people remain still displaced from their homes. The only silver lining, if there is one, is that it's just as it was science and vaccinations that are getting us through COVID-19, it's going to be science and innovation that will get us there and get us through climate change. Many of you here probably followed the news closely and the commitments coming out of COP26. And you might recall the latest climate change analysis that was recently presented, that global temperatures are set to rise alarmingly by at least 2.4 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels by the end of this century. Even in the best case scenarios, if every government fully implemented all of their emissions reduction targets, the Earth is still going to warm by 1.8 degrees at the moment. So unfortunately, Canada is among one of the countries that are furthest off track in terms of delivering on the emissions reduction pledges that we've made previously. We're just not doing enough. So we can and we must do better for all of Canada and all of Canadians. At Aviva, we believe we have a responsibility to act for our people, our customers, our shareholders, and all of the communities that we do business in. We've been carbon neutral since 2006, and we're working towards our ambition to be net zero by 2040. Our climate commitment covers our entire value chain, from operations, underwriting, products, claims, and investments. And for us at Aviva, protecting and enhancing the planet's precious biodiversity has always been an integral part of our long-standing commitments to sustainability. But nature-based climate solutions use unique powers of nature to both capture and store carbon. Alongside rapid decarbonisation with the right restoration actions, nature can deliver as much as 30% of the cost-effective emissions reductions needed to achieve our goals that were set out in the Paris Agreement on Climate Action by 2030. We know that climate change and biodiversity loss are closely linked and have to be tackled together, because success in one is fundamentally dependent on success in the other. And that's why our action to tackle biodiversity loss goes hand in hand with the Aviva sustainability ambition, including our 2040 net zero plans. And it's why I'm so proud of our partnership, as I said at the beginning, with Megan and the rest of the WWF Canada team. And we're really pleased to be the lead supporter of the Climate and Nature Grant Programme. The investment is going to support local group and Indigenous organisations to restore degraded habitats and improve community resiliency across Canada. As a leading insurer, we see firsthand the devastating impacts of climate change, and we're acting on both fronts, restoring biodiversity loss and building back better. Fixing a home means nothing if we ignore the natural surroundings and the degraded lands and shorelines. The work that ALUS and Project Watershed and the other 5 grantee recipients are doing will make a meaningful change in a number of communities across Canada. To further increase the impact, Aviva is going to be increasing our investment by double to over $2 million to the Nature and Climate Grant Programme to support even more organisations and projects in this area. And to guide our climate work, Aviva recently published our biodiversity policy, and it's available on our website if anybody would like to check it out. We've also signed the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, committing to do our part to reverse nature loss by 2030. And we know this is going to be challenging, but we've got to take a stand and start working on this. At this stage, the information needed to set specific targets does not actually exist. But being part of the Finance for Biodiversity Impact Assessment Working Group means that we're able to support the development of assessment tools, methodologies, and biodiversity-related metrics. So in this way, we'll be able to understand our dependencies and impacts, and subsequently develop appropriate targets and goals. Each and every one of us here has the power and influence to make changes in our lives, to help fight climate change using nature. And even if the methodologies that we have aren't yet perfect, and the path isn't perfectly laid out, we've got to start doing something. We need to act. So good intentions and promises must translate into actions and results. Only then will we, together, regenerate Canada and transform the Canadian economy into the low carbon economy that we know we need, that we know that will help create a better tomorrow for all Canadians. So with that, Megan, I'll hand back to you.
Jason, thank you. And thanks everyone at Aviva. We're thrilled to work with you in true partnership, and we're just delighted that you've seen the power of this work for climate and biodiversity to the point that you've even increased your support within the first year of this partnership. With that, all right, here it is on the slide, 7 projects that we funded together across Canada this past year. And you can see that we are working from the East Coast to the West Coast, and we're supporting restoration of coastal ecosystems, wetlands, forests, shorelines, grasslands, and tidal marshes. The projects we're supporting are also engaging local community members in restoration efforts. And I love to do a deep dive into a couple of them. So I'll be bringing on Lara Ellis, the SVP of Policy and Partnerships at ALUS, and Caitlin Perchowski, Executive Director of Project Watershed. We'll start with Lara. Lara, why don't you kick it off by telling everyone a little bit about your project that's being supported through the Nature and Climate Grant Program?
Sure. Just before I do that, like Jason, I'm calling in from Toronto, which is treaty land. It's Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, traditional territory of many nations, which Jason mentioned, and now home to many Indigenous people, including Inuit and Métis. A little bit about ALUS. ALUS stands for Alternative Land Use Services. It's a program that was designed by farmers. It's very grassroots. Each of our program areas has a local committee, which is made up of farmers and ranchers, experts, and other NGO representatives. We have programming in 33 communities across Canada, and we work with farmers and natures to produce nature-based solutions. So support from the Nature and Climate program, and we're very fortunate to be working with partners like World Wildlife Fund and Aviva, are supporting 2 of our programs, one of which is brand new. It's ALUS Outaouais. This is a new program in Quebec, in the southwestern region of the province, so just north of the city of Ottawa, our national capital. Where agriculture is concentrated along the Ottawa and Gatineau rivers. So this is an area where agriculture is generally small operations, including cattle, forage, lots of vegetables, and fruit production. The other area that where funding from this program is supporting is Chatham-Kent in Ontario. So Chatham-Kent is in the Lake Erie Basin in the southwest part of the province. And it includes the Thames River, which is a major tributary to the lake. Also of great interest is that Chatham-Kent is the #1 producer in Canada of tomatoes. So everyone who's a tomato fan really has a stake in what's going on in that area. So funding from this program is helping put nature back on farms in those 2 areas in Quebec and Ontario. So our projects include tree planting, restoring grasslands, including native tallgrass prairie, one of the most endangered ecosystems on the planet, restoring and enhancing wetlands, protecting waterways with buffers and other riparian areas. And a lot of our projects are specifically designed to help species at risk. So these sorts of projects include delayed haying for grassland birds. So all of the projects that ALUS does with our farmers and ranchers are designed to suit both the farm operation and to solve environmental priorities. So it's important that as we're looking at solving both climate and biodiversity issues, that we're really paying attention to the people on the ground who know exactly what the best solutions are. So the way that ALUS works is that we have local committees, as I mentioned before, who help inform the design of programs with expert advice, and also work with the farmers and the ranchers to make sure that the problems are implemented and maintained over time. Also a really important issue to deal with, since just putting a project in the ground doesn't mean that it will survive, especially with more severe weather. So we need to make sure that the trees that we plant survive, that the wetlands that we put in aren't overtaken by invasive species and that sort of thing. So once the projects are in, there is management and maintenance to make sure that these areas are functioning in the best way that they can. So I think at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin to talk about her project.
Thanks so much, Laura. It's so great to hear about your work. Beautiful work. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Perchowski, and I'm the Executive Director of Project Watershed. And before I start, I just wanted to mention to all of you today that I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Quiquitlam First Nations. But the work I will be speaking about is actually carried out in partnership with the Comox First Nation on their traditional and unceded territories. I'm a marine ecologist with an undergrad in marine biology and a master's in restoration ecology, and I've been working in the nonprofit marine stewardship sector for about 8 years now. My background is specifically in community and youth engaged stewardship and ecological restoration, specifically focusing on nearshore and coastal ecosystems within the coastal British Columbia area. Comox Valley Project Watershed, or Project Watershed for short, is a nonprofit based in the Comox Valley that supports restoration and conservation of local ecosystems through information, knowledge, and action. Currently, Project Watershed is working on a great ecological and cultural restoration project called Kuskusam. It's a restoration project that aims to restore an 8.3 acre past sawmill site to a forested tidal wetland, all within the Comox estuary of Courtenay, BC, on the east coast of Vancouver Island. The project is situated just north of the mouth of the Courtenay River, the convergence of multiple watersheds that support 4 species of salmonids, including endangered summer run Chinook. The project aims to not only create and restore fish and wildlife habitat, but also to target the intersection of climate mitigation and adaptation and cultural and ecological restoration. The site that you're seeing here was originally developed in the 1950s as a sawmill, and much of the culturally significant vegetation and landscape was cleared over the following 70 years. The site was further industrialized and developed in that timescale. In the 1970s, the site was raised above river level and separated from the river and floodplain by a 400-meter steel sheet piling wall. When the sawmill was shut down in 2004 and the land put up for sale in 2011, that's when Project Watershed, with our 2 partners, decided to step up and purchase the land for restoration. We successfully acquired the land in 2021 and began our restoration, which is what you're seeing here in the photos, in this past year. During this year, which was our first year of active restoration, we began with the removal of hard surfacing, concrete, and asphalt from the site. Next year, 2022, will be the large-scale earthworks, which will consist of the recontouring and regrading of the site, along with extensive native species planting. And then that will be followed by the following year with the removal of that steel piling wall and the reconnection of the site to the Courtenay River. We're very lucky to have a natural template for restoration, which you can see here actually in the very mouth of the river. That is a conservation area called Hollyhock Flats. And just beside it, that lovely concrete slab is our restoration site, Kuskusam. Next slide, please. So Kuskusam is a project that was co-created in partnership with Comox First Nation and the city of Courtenay. And that partnership has been a keystone to our current work. You can see here one of the key meanings and the signing of some important documents securing the land and the future of the landscape. We have a handful of the matriarchs of the Comox First Nation, along with the chief, Nicole Rempel. Behind and to the right, you can see the mayor of City of Courtenay, along with some of the councillors, specifically Doug Hillian, who has been a great supporter of the project. And then to the left, you see some Project Watershed folks in the back here. And all together, we've been able to carry out this project. We're so glad to have Indigenous leadership on this project, and it has really driven the restoration design and the values held within this project. So it's been a real honor to be supported by and held in partnership with the traditional stewards of this landscape. So thank you so much for listening. I think now we're going to move on to a questions and answer period.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, Lara. Those are great snapshots. I've got a couple of questions, and then I'll bring Jason in for some questions too. I know he's got some. Lara, I'm going to start with you. You snuck in a term. You said delayed haying. You just kind of like snuck it in there without any explanation. And it's, I think, a great example of bringing to life how this work impacts both species and climate. Can you share with us what that's all about?
Sure. So some there are a few different grassland birds that are at risk in Canada, including bobolink and meadowlark. So they are ground nesting birds. They prefer, they live in hayfields or other or areas of prairie. And so when they are living in hayfields, if a crop is taken up too early before they fledge, then the nests are destroyed. So one of the projects that we fund across southern Canada is called delayed haying, where the farmers are paid to miss a cut of hay. So delaying the hay, the cutting of the hay. In the Wwf program area, they're actually experimenting with different ways of doing this. We're working with another conservation partner, Canadian Wildlife Federation, to look at different patterns and different ways of doing this to maximize the number of nests that survive. So ALUS is really great at experimentation, trying different things, seeing what the results are. If they aren't as good as we'd like, then going back and working with conservation partners and experts to try to maximize biodiversity impacts.
Sounds like it. Thanks a lot, Lara. And Caitlin, I wanted to ask you, you talked about how you were so honored to have an Indigenous partner with Comox First Nation. What are the benefits to Comox? How is this work further benefiting them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Comox First Nation was basically brought onto this project right in the ideation phase of it. And they made it clear that they wanted to be deeply involved in the process and that they were interested in being the long-term stewards and owners of this particular site. So once restoration is complete, the site will be rematriated to the Comox First Nation. Currently, it's co-owned by City of Courtenay and the Comox First Nation. But once we've put in place the necessary conservation covenants, then this site will be fully rematriated to the Comox.
That's going to be a great day. That's going to be a great day. Jason, I don't want to take all the airtime. I know you have questions.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. I know that it's a great conversation. I mean, I'm really interested in, I obviously work in the corporate sector, and aside from providing financial support and resources, what can corporate Canada do to help you more? What can we, beyond just the financials, what can corporate Canada do? And also, it's two parts. One, what can they do to help organizations like yourselves? But also, what can corporate Canada just do a better job of and be better corporate citizens to help reduce biodiversity loss?
I'll jump in here. So I think, acting as examples, I think the partnership between Aviva and World Wildlife Fund is very inspiring, and hopefully it will give ideas to other conservation organizations and corporate players. Jason, I totally agree with your comments prior and Megan's about the time for talk is over. We really need to be looking at action and planning for changing climate, right? So in particular, I think much of like the work that you described that Aviva is doing, looking at what will happen in a 2, 3, or 4 degree scenarios with climate change, and thinking about where risk is. We know nature-based solutions can be a large part of the mitigation part of climate action, but in terms of climate adaptation, where are areas that we need to be investing heavily? Where are areas that play an important role in terms of either where your operations are sited or where you've got supply coming from? So I think, that sort of analysis makes the case for bigger investment in biodiversity and climate action. We know that companies that are investing heavily in ESG strategies do better in terms of stock prices. So it's good for the planet, and I think good for the bottom line as well. One other thing that I would mention is that, we are really strapped in the not-for-profit sector. We are asked by our funders to keep our admin costs very low. And so there are things that corporations do well in terms of administration, tech, HR, all of those things, all of those areas where you excel can actually help us build our organizations as well. And we really need that help. I mean, we are often told by funders, spend less on administration, where in the corporate world, if you operated with the level of administration that we do, people would not think you're a good investment. So please help us build our systems, help us be resilient organizations so that we are in place to deliver the nature-based solutions that we all require.
That's great, Lara. Thank you. Caitlin, anything?
Yeah, I was actually just going to build on what Lara just said. We've partnered and collaborated with the corporate sector, and we found that pro bono support was actually super effective. So we worked with different corporations, whether it's risk management, law professionals, environmental consultants, engineering firms, and really any sort of in-kind support that they've given has gone a really long way. So pretty much individual corporations cultivate a lot of in-house expertise and providing some of that to support NGOs. So like Lara said, we can reduce our administration costs. That's really great for us. And then folks like you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Caitlin, I was just going to say that's a really neat segue into the only other thing I was going to ask is about the, clearly those partnerships and relationships that you create are important. How do you, what would you like potential partner organizations out there to do, or how do you approach those partner organizations to get them interested, and to engage them?
Yeah, I think we just kind of reach out and ask, honestly. A lot of what we've done is identify our gaps. Our project Kususum has generated a ton of community support. So I think it's creating a project that the community really believes in. And then when you need those, when you have those gaps or need that support, you reach out to the community and ask them for what you need. And we've found that that strategy has actually worked really wonderfully to get us the pro bono support we've needed.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so ALUS really is built on partnerships. We partner with local organizations to administer the program. We consider our relationship with farmers and ranchers to be partners. And then in terms of other supporters, a lot of our investors are interested in biodiversity, others more in climate action, some specifically in wetlands or natural infrastructure. So we really, I think the success of our partnerships is based on the fact that people are getting what they need from our organization. And we're obviously, getting support from them financially or otherwise to expand our work. So we have grown really fast. The only limit to how much we can do really is financial. So I do think that, we know that there's so much potential for nature-based solutions, but we really need organizations like ALUS who can deliver on the ground. So we need to be working to build these partnerships and really create the revenue streams that are appropriate for the nature of the problem that we're dealing with.
Lara, we've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to squeeze in a question about partnerships. I asked Caitlin about their partnership with Comox First Nation, and I think a lot of people watching are probably wondering, wow, you partner with farmers and ranchers, that maybe not the most likely allies in this struggle. Can you share with us a little bit about why partnering with farmers can be such an effective strategy?
Yeah, so we really need to be working with farmers and ranchers. Collectively, they make up the largest private land holdings in the country. And a lot of that land is the most productive in the country. So there's obviously a correlation with how productive land is and biodiversity. And given where agricultural land is in the country, where the majority of species at risk are located, it's essential that we work with farmers and ranchers. And farmers and ranchers are really on the front lines of climate change. Their whole business depends on being able to grow things. So it's in their interest. They understand ecosystems, they understand natural processes. And so the work that we're doing is very in line with their stewardship ethics and their need also to be running their business, right? Growing food. So it just absolutely makes sense to them. A report came out from Nature United recently saying that 60% of the opportunity for nature-based climate solutions is on agricultural land in Canada. So we need to really ramp up programs that work for farmers, that farmers are excited about, that allow them to do projects that make sense for them and deliver the most results for nature.
Lara and Caitlin, Thanks very much for sharing your work. Your stories are inspiring. I'm sure they've inspired others on this call who are joining us today to think about what they can do to restore nature for wildlife and climate change. Thank you very much. And Jason, I have a question for you. I have two, in fact. I'd love to hear from you. What inspired you today? And also, what's next for Aviva Canada in the nature and climate space?
So, I mean, I love what I really like about today is it's a very pragmatic conversation, right? We're talking about organizations, and we're talking with organizations that are actually acting on the front lines. It's not it's not a theoretical, it's not an academic conversation or dialogue around climate and what can be done. It's actually, you know, brilliant examples from Lara and Caitlin and the other organizations that are just they're acting like they're already in this space, they're already doing something about it, and they can thought lead everybody else that isn't quite in the hands-on day-to-day space that their organizations are in. So I think that's fantastic. And look, in terms of your second question, you know, Aviva's put this commitment out there of net zero by 2040. I don't believe there's any other global insurance companies that have matched that commitment. I've seen commitments from other financial services companies that talk about 2050 or talk about parts of what they're going to do. But the thing for us really is to drive it down now into, you know, what we've said is the first phase is what's our carbon footprint for our own operations? How do we get that to net zero? So sort out our own house first. But at the same time, we're starting to have some great conversations with, you know, governments, municipalities, other organizations and partners around what are they doing? Are they committed to science-based targets? Are they already thinking about this? Do they have an ESG strategy? And it really is shaping really significantly and quickly the kind of dialogue and the lens that we're applying to our business. You know, I'll tell you, with regards to the floods in British Columbia, we had a conversation with some of my team over the weekend, and we said we have to give people emergency evacuation cover, whether or not they bought it in their insurance policy or regardless, right? And I think, you know, it's the right thing to do. And I know other companies, insurance companies, are looking at it through the same lens. And we've just got to start this tangible, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? And not let it become something that is academic and in closed room conversations.
Yeah, I mean, these challenges are huge. That picture you painted I think demonstrates that. And it needs a whole of society approach. And I have to say today, the thing that I find inspiring is hearing about leadership from the corporate sector, because we do need that whole of society approach if we're going to be able to reverse some of these impacts and build a better future. It sounds like you've got really big plans. And I'm glad to hear that our plans are aligning to support more projects with real benefits like the ones that Lara and Caitlin just talked to us about.
Absolutely.
As you know, here at WWF Canada, we're deeply committed to the restoration of nature. And that's why when we announced our plan to regenerate Canada, we specifically set an ambitious goal to restore at least 1 million hectares of lost ecosystems by 2030. And clearly, we can't do that by ourselves. So achieving this goal is going to depend on Indigenous guardians and Indigenous-led conservation. It's going to depend on groups like ALUS and Project Watershed and the individuals who volunteer with them. And it's going to depend on corporate partners who set their own goals and take actions to achieve them. When we all work together, we can reverse what seems irreversible. And I hope that what you've heard today has given you a little bit of hope and inspiration to consider what you can do to help and join us in that mission. Bruce, back to you.
Sorry about that. I just got to fire everything up, and
there's lots of buttons.
My reactions are as good as they used to be, I guess. Well, thank you so much, Megan, and thank you to the rest of the group who I think are going to join us for Q&A. We've already got a couple questions sitting in the chat room, and coincidentally, the first one's for you, Megan.
Okay.
And I'll give you first crack at it, and I think we can then ask others to chime in as well. The question was, the individual was more familiar with WWF work in developing countries.
Okay.
And they wanted to ask you about some lessons that you've learned from your international and pre-existing projects to ensure local communities are properly engaged on your conservation work.
Yeah. Oh, great question. So that's one of the incredible things about working at WWF Canada is we are a network, and there are WWFs all over the world. Here, we actually work fairly closely with one other WWF in particular, and that's WWF Nepal. And I have learned a lot from them about projects that benefit local communities and Indigenous communities. And they're really putting their proverbial money where their mouth is, looking at how can, the first question they ask is, how does this benefit the community? Because you can do all you want to try and save tigers in Nepal, but if the community doesn't see themselves in that work, whatever you do isn't going to last. You're not going to have that support because, let's be honest, I'm using the tiger example with Nepal, but tiger habitat is where we as humans live. Habitat for the bobolink is where we in Canada farm. We're tied in together. So if we're going to be successful, you have to use that lens of what is in it, how does this benefit local communities and in particular Indigenous communities. And we've learned lots of lessons from our friends in Nepal and are very grateful to have access to those learnings.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Caitlin, Jason, you guys want to take a shot at, and Lara, do you want to take a shot at that community, how to enhance that community involvement?
I'll jump in here. So, programs like ALUS really engage producers, partners. We have tours, we have 33 community programs across the country. People can go on our website, they can get connected with a local community and start seeing what's happening and ways of getting involved.
I was just going to build on what Megan said, Bruce, and just, the relevancy to the local communities that you operate in is key, and trying to get support and engagement when it's about something that people can't feel proximate to is a really hard job. It's really, really difficult. And that's actually one of the things that's driven the way we've looked at, a number of initiatives across Aviva, but particularly in this space, because if it's something that people don't feel distant from, it's going to be very hard to get buy-in and engagement.
Excellent. Yeah. Caitlin, thank you, Jason.
I would just build on what Jason said there. With a lot of our projects, what we do first is kind of bring them to the community. So we do a bunch of community engagement sessions, and we see what values that the community would like to see integrated into our projects. I really believe that building projects with community builds better and more resilient projects. So we just make sure when we do engage them and do take their perspective into account, that they see it integrated directly into the projects that we develop and deliver.
Awesome. Great. This is a perfect segue into our next question, and I think it works so well, I'll just keep it open-ended. How can we convince communities such as Ottawa, of course, very near and dear to Megan and my heart, to stop spreading out and using up farmland and marshes? I think, here in Goulburn, out in Stittsville, where I live, we've got a very primary wetland area, I think 10,000 acres, something like that, which attenuates floods in a significant way with the Ottawa River. So how do we get those communities? Development's an integral part of growth and tax base and everything else. How do we work with those communities and perhaps farmers that are in that boundary zone where some of that land is being sold and developed?
Yeah, so many cities have green belts. There's the green belt around Toronto, which tries to support farming above other uses. So some of those decisions really are political. I do hope that some of the better understanding about the value of natural infrastructure, such as the wetland that you're talking about, increases understanding politically that development does have costs that are often, saving a wetland costs a lot more money often than what you have to do to replace it in terms of stormwater management and other ecosystem services. So I think, as the population is more informed about the value of nature, hopefully our politicians will be making some better decisions.
Yeah, and I'll offer up one tool that we just developed and launched at WWF. We actually have been able to map out across Canada where the carbon is in the ecosystems. And the data is available for everyone, for you at home with your computer, for a conservation organization, for a municipality. And you can do a deep dive into an area and see, okay, well, what is the carbon value here? And there are some areas, I think, in particular, our wetlands, our peatlands, when you look across Canada and you see how rich the carbon is in the landscape, it's good evidence to say, okay, we do maybe, we need to consider development, but why here? And challenge particular places that are very carbon rich, very species rich, biodiversity rich. We just need to think a little clearer about how we do that work. And, I used to be an elected official. Elected officials aren't special. They're just human beings in their communities. So get to know him or her, get to know them and befriend them and be their go-to on different issues. Send them a copy of our carbon map. Tell them what it is that you're interested in or where you have areas of expertise. And I know they'll be grateful because they're learning in real time as well.
Thank you, Megan. Maybe you could share the link to that report in the chat area. We can.
I will, as long as you don't give me the next question.
Okay, no, the next question is for Caitlin, and it builds off the previous question. Caitlin, you mentioned during your presentation about purchase was one of the initial steps in the project, and we certainly have seen plenty of examples where land ownership can have a very significant effect on how that land is being used and even redeveloped to bring back environmental services. Can you tell us a little bit about how you managed that purchase? Because it must have been pretty significant.
Yes, it was significant. The overall purchase price was about $3.2 million. So we managed to raise that with the help of a lot of folks over about 2 or 3 years. So we managed to work with Interfor, who were actually original owners of the actual land, and we basically put forth an agreement to them saying, can you please hold this land for us while we attempt to raise $3.2 million so we can purchase it from you, which is what we actually ended up doing. And they were actually really great and really flexible as we took the time we needed to raise that funding. And a lot of it came from the community of the Comox Valley, a lot of individual members from that community, as well as businesses and corporate partners. And then a huge chunk also came from the province of British Columbia so that we could actually push past that final goal and acquire the land. And the full land transfer happened in February of 2021.
Wow. Well, listen, we're at the end of our Q&A. I know there's still questions in the chat room. We'll see if there's some way we can actually bring those into the report and have you folks maybe provide your additional wisdom on the remaining questions, just so we don't lose that, because obviously we've got a very well-educated audience here that's dishing out some really good stuff. But I just want to thank you all for the excellent conversation, the excellent examples. I mean, just the pairing of biodiversity with climate, and the fact that you guys are developing a partnership that is so spot on in terms of delivering what we desperately need. I think what we really need now is scale, because we've got a big country and we've got a lot of regions that need the help that you guys are delivering on the ground. So I just want to congratulate you all. And I guess that's, from my closing, that's what I've noticed through the conversation that we've had here today, is that partnerships, private sector with non-governmental organizations, not-for-profit interests with governments and policymakers, these are the things that are actually going to be able to deliver on building back better and restoring some of the services and ecosystem damage that we see. So I think that this partnership couldn't have been a better conversation, particularly with the on-the-ground project examples. And I just want to thank everybody today for their contributions. Really fascinating discussion. And with that, I'll bring us to a close.